Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Roshan Muhammed Salih here, the editor of Five Pillars, and this is The Big Picture, our weekly show where we break down the main issues facing the Ummah each week. And today we're only going to tackle one topic because there's only really been one major topic in the news, and that is recent events in France. So we've had a tumultuous few weeks in France. We had Macron's speech a few weeks ago, basically calling for a state-sponsored Islam. And then we had basically raids on Muslim establishments. Then we had the unfortunate, disgusting beheading of the French teacher a few days ago. And then we had a massive rally in Paris. And this week, yet more raids on French Muslim establishments. A mosque closed down close to Paris this week. Today, and also several arrests taking place and several Muslim organizations complaining of intimidation and harassment. So today we're only going to be talking about one topic. We're going to tackle it in depth. We have three guests. We're going to talk to a French human rights activist in a few minutes' time, Yasser Louati. We're going to talk to a British journalist who's been based in France for many years, who actually supports the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, or the right to show them, and the concept of French secularism. And then we're also going to finish the show a little bit later on with talking to a French Algerian Arab journalist. But before we get into that, let's have a quick reminder of the huge rallies that took place all across France on Sunday in support of secularism.
That died, they are killed, they are tortured, they are harassed.
You know, we have to teach our youth. That's the first thing we have to do. It's education. Parents must teach what secularism means, what freedom means. You can't murder someone because of a drawing. It's a shame, a shame. We can have different opinions, we can disagree, but we can never resort to violence, never to hatred. It's the role of parents, also of society, and we must also stop this discourse of victimhood. There's room for everyone in France. The discourse of victimhood generates youths who want revenge. No, I think that parents have their role. Religious people have their role too. To teach, to say why this society is not a racist society. You know, a teacher for us is like a prophet, a wise man who teaches and gives love. It's the future of our children. We entrust our children to these teachers. And in the end, what's our reward? They slaughter him, they kill him. It's a shame. Secularism is the solution. You separate power from religion and also get rid of these threats. Because the French model bothers the Islamists.
C'est très important de défendre les valeurs de la France et les valeurs de l'Europe.
It's very important to defend the values of France and the values of Europe, because these are values that can be considered universal. And today we have before us a very organized, very structured political Islamist movement, which is gradually destroying our societies. So it's necessary to be united and to express this. I think we have a gap in the field of ideas, and today, especially education, cannot encourage students who can think for themselves. And I think that when it comes to ideas, we absolutely have to dig deeper and make sure that we create students with critical thought who can reflect on faith, on their place, and on developing a certain tolerance towards others. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Yasser Louati, who's a French Muslim human rights activist. Yasser is joining us from Paris today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yasser, how are you doing, brother?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yasser, let's get straight into this. Your reaction to the events in France over the last few weeks?
It's one tragedy after another. It's like it's never ending. And I wrote some years ago that this is the new normal for us, that an attack can happen out of the blue anywhere, anytime. And that when terrorists make no difference between Muslims and non-Muslims, we have, warmongers and hate preachers who actually see the opportunity to preach more hatred of Muslims. And in this case, a teacher got beheaded. And before we get into this is the trial of social media on the one hand, and the massive failure of our intelligence that nobody wants to speak about. We have to remember that.
Because obviously, I understand this guy was reported to the authorities by French Muslims. We have attack after attack in France taking place. The French intelligence services are not stopping these attacks.
Well, what's even more worrisome is that they have implemented mass surveillance in France in the aftermath of the Edward Snowden revelations, meaning that the government has access to all of our online communication. On top of it, they can raid any person anytime, since the state of emergency has become permanent after the 2017 law on domestic security. So we have this person who gets reported in a country that has mass surveillance, and the person is not apprehended as he has shown clear that he was about to commit something. Having said that, we also have the trial of social media, that this mentality of seeking the buzz, to share information, to get as many likes, as many shares as possible, and comments, to get as many views as possible, led to an innocent being killed. Now, yes, people can say it was maybe insensitive for him to show the drawings. Who cares? Whatever happened was being solved in the classroom or in the school, and nothing whatsoever could have justified him being beheaded. So we have two massive failures, the way our state is supposedly tackling terrorism, but on the other, how people get accustomed to seeking attention on social media. And it turns out that, if I just may finish, that the teacher asked his Muslim students to leave the classroom out of courtesy in order not to offend them. He offered them to leave the classroom. Others said, no, he expelled them because he wanted to humiliate them. It turns out the lady, the student who said, I got expelled, was either not his student at all or not there the day it happened. Again, we have an innocent man who got beheaded, and down the line, we have a desperate president using this tragedy to get involved and use Islamophobia as a stepping stone for his career, because he's got absolutely nothing to offer us in terms of economic solutions, etc.
Yeah, your picture is freezing, Yasser, but we can hear you loud and clear. So just a reminder to the viewers, or a message to the viewers, I apologize, the line isn't perfect to Yasser, but we can hear him loud and clear, which is the most important thing. Yasser, there have been some raids today. The Interior Minister has gone on TV and has blatantly said that the people being targeted are not necessarily under suspicion of this crime. So that would basically presume that the French state is targeting innocent people to send a message to intimidate.
Well, this was the case during the state of emergency in 2015, 2016, 2017. Remember that nearly 5,000 raids had been carried, overwhelmingly against Muslims, Muslim homes, Muslim businesses, places of worship, mosques being ransacked by the police, apartments as well. I spoke to families being destroyed, mothers who got dragged out of their beds in their underwears, the kids being dragged under gunpoint, with the long-term trauma that nobody so far is going to have any idea about in at least 10-15 years. So down the line, I know that other tragedies may actually be happening because of that. Today, Gérald Darmanin says, as clearly, we have nothing on these people. We're just sending a message. So forget due process, forget the justice system. It's only about using the state repressive means to target individuals against whom they've got nothing. Now they want to dissolve 3 organizations against whom, legally speaking, they've got nothing. Now the question is the state going to target terrorism at the roots, or going to feed into Islamophobia and then allow terrorist attacks to carry on? Because again, this, and I'm going to quote John Brennan, the former head of the CIA, after the January 2015 attacks and those of November 2015, massive intelligence failure. Who's speaking about that? Nobody. And this one-upmanship is only to divert public attention, that allows scrutiny on these failures.
Yasser, I watched a debate that you were involved in on France 24 yesterday, the English version of the channel. And what struck me is the complete absence of a holistic discussion about what happened. The focus is very much on Islamic extremism and Islam and Muslims sorting their own house out. There is no discussion about French foreign policy. There is no discussion about how Muslims are treated in France in terms of Islamophobia and racism. So it seems to me that the French state basically has its head buried into the sand, and they just want to basically, have this state-sponsored Islam where they monitor mosques, where they fashion an Islam, and ultimately no non-Muslim can create an Islam. It's ultimately up to Muslims to do that. So, I mean, is the French state completely blind? Do they have their head completely buried in the sand? Because it seems to me that they do. And if they don't wake up, more attacks are going to happen.
Sir, I'm going to quote a famous artist, don't believe the hype. So right now, the French government is, first, they're talking about Islamic separatism. No definition. They spoke a few months before that, radicalization. Quoting the French Senate, and I have the book behind me, we have no definition. We adopt the term under the pressure of events. So now the president is using separatism as the launching discourse for his presidential campaign. The term separatism was used right after the Black Lives Matter marches against police brutality and systemic racism. So instead of addressing amply documented, discrimination, police brutality, upon which he agreed as a candidate, he said, no, he dismissed everything. This is separatism. They want to ruin the republic. No, Muslims, blacks, Arabs, Roma people, they want to be French. And they keep showing their allegiance to the French Republic. And the assassin who killed that innocent was not part of the French Muslim communities, because not only he was, I'm sorry to say it, but he wasn't part of the French Muslim communities, but he also was reported as the French
president. An 18-year-old Chechen guy.
Exactly, an 18-year-old Chechen who was reported. French Muslims reported him, and on top of it, we have to complete the discussion on this subject. We have the French president saying, I'm going to shape a French Islam. It's a secular republic. Either we are a secular republic or we are not. You cannot, on the one hand, bash laïcité day in, day out to deprive Muslims of their religious freedoms. And when you want to control Muslims, you say, no, I need to go beyond laïcité. The same way laïcité was applied in 1905 in continental France, but never in the Muslim colonies to keep Islam under control. And you are right. It's on Muslims to develop their own French brand of Islam.
Yes, sir. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute, because the fact is that hundreds of French people have been killed over the last few years in terrorist attacks. And the people who committed those terror attacks were Muslims, or nominally Muslims, whether we want to call them Muslims or not. These are facts. So viewing it from a French perspective, your average French white guy, it looks as though there's a problem with Islam. So do we have to look introspectively at ourselves in the mirror and ask some pretty awkward questions?
Well, let's take first the data on the victims of terrorism. The overwhelming majority, something like 86% of the victims of international terrorism are Muslims. The overwhelming majority. Let's not, try to, unless we discount and dismiss Muslim lives, the biggest victims of these groups, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and Aqmi, whatever, they are Muslims, and they are targeting and destroying Muslim majority countries. Now, those groups are based abroad. Their ideologues are abroad, and they still manage to hire people in France and to get their ideology sent and disseminated in France. This raises the question, how come a group like Daesh can publish a piece in their magazine Daber called The Destruction of the Grey Zone, calling for terrorist attacks to do two things: shed blood and divide Western countries by turning Muslims into the enemy within. That's exactly what Islamophobes are doing. They're playing to their hands, whether they are in the government or not. The second problem we have with that, because Muslims are not allowed to self-organize and any initiative held by Muslims is sabotaged, they have not been able, of course there are responsibilities, and my posts on social media turned me into the black sheep because I'm highly critical of the way Muslims are organized, but that's a different topic. There is nothing was made possible for a French Muslim counter narrative to the ideology of Daesh. So which means Daesh defeated everybody ideologically on social media. They carried their attacks, and down the line, governments and the media alike played into their hands by turning Muslims as the enemy within. Which French Muslim organization called for those attacks? Zero. It comes from abroad, so we also have to look into our foreign policy and what's happening abroad.
I mean, when I used to live in France, many years ago, and I do try to follow my best what's happening in France. It seems to me as though French Muslim organizations, they're quite weak when it comes to their public spokespeople. They're quite apologetic as well. A lot of them, I mean, the imam we were listening to in that VT a few minutes ago, I mean, that could have been Emmanuel Macron talking.
He's a clown. Nobody takes him seriously.
All right, so he's just someone, he's like the Majid Nawaz of French Islam, is he?
He's the pawn of the pro-Israeli lobby. He's playing to the hands of the secular fundamentalists. Yeah, he said that we apologize. Who's apologizing? This guy's not even part of the French Muslim community. No,
but where's the strong Muslim voice, or are you guys completely drowned out in an avalanche of kind of mainstream demonization?
Well, the biggest obstacle to Muslims organizing, if I may say, are Muslims themselves, because all the new initiatives, community organizing, newspapers, citizens organizing, training, women's rights, human rights, whatever, they are all organized outside of the mosque. Because the mosque is the battlefield for the French state, foreign countries like Morocco, Algeria, sometimes Saudi Arabia, because they use their mosques as the outlets for their foreign policy. And oftentimes they oppose legitimate movements coming from the grassroots, Muslim grassroots, that say, we want to speak for ourselves. We know who we are, we know where we belong, and we know what we should do for us to rise and become, organized communities. And I can use examples. All of us, at some point or another, we faced the mosque against us before even the French state cracks down on us. As human rights activists, we want to train people on their rights. We want to help them organize. And the mosque comes in and says, no, you don't do that. So there are interests, Muslim interests, to keep Muslims dominated and incapable of organizing. And I think
what's it like being a Muslim in France? I mean, we complain a lot in the UK about Islamophobia, about media demonization, about the prevent counter-terrorism strategy being very oppressive. But I get the feeling that being a Muslim in France is a lot more difficult than being a Muslim in the UK.
I'm going to quote a British French. He said, your Islamophobia is really, like backward. At least ours in the UK is more sophisticated. I can be a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf and I can get a job, no problem whatsoever. In France, if you're a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, you stand 1% chance of getting a job. If you are a Muslim person applying for a job, you are 5 times more likely of being discriminated against. If you are a black or Arab young man, you are 30 times more likely of being racially profiled by the police. That's official statistics. Now, the problem is, it's one, I tend to be quite a radical on these issues, but I believe in emancipation, I believe in full freedom, and I'm a radical on freedom of speech. So if someone does something, it's because you give them the feeling that they can do it without consequences. Because what Emmanuel Macron is doing to Muslims today, he will never dare doing that to any other religious community. We had, for example, pedophilia cases for decades in the Catholic Church. Where was the French state?
Yasser, can I just stop you there? Because, the French state, they always say that, the secularism is applied equally. So Charlie Hebdo can make fun of Jews, can make fun of Catholics, can make fun of Muslims, and they do it equally. They discriminate equally. And that's freedom of speech. So is that the case?
No, it's not the case. Charlie Hebdo, the overwhelming majority of their caricature, the drawings, are on Muslims, Muslim women, blacks being drawn as monkeys. Now, my challenge to Charlie Hebdo, and I'm a firm believer, you cannot deprive people of saying whatever they want to say. But this freedom comes with a responsibility and obligation. You have freedom of speech, but so do the people that you are, berating. So in that case, Muslims, when they are targeted, should also have a platform to talk back, to answer. Yet they are spoken of constantly, and they never get a platform to speak against whoever is berating them. Now, since you are speaking of Charlie Hebdo, I'm going to be very clear on that. They have the right to publish whatever they want to publish. But if Charlie Hebdo is truly about freedom of speech and making fun of anything they want, just like they made fun of this poor kid who was an immigrant found dead on the seashore, the island, and they said had he lived, he would have been a sexual predator. Why doesn't Charlie Hebdo make fun, hold your breath, of their friends who got killed in the newsroom? We know it's morally reprehensible. That's why we don't do it. And I would never do it. But if you people want to tackle what's sacred to others, you should also accept that whatever you think is sacred gets targeted as well. And that's what we call being equal, being on an equal foothold. You can target what I hold dear, but I also have the right to tackle what you hold dear, and don't impose your sacrality upon mine. Just I don't have to impose my sacrality upon yours.
Yes, we've been joined by another guest online. So I'm gonna wrap up with a few questions, or one question to you before we bring John in. Obviously, we all condemn the beheading. It was obviously wrong. It was murder. There's no doubt about that. But a lot of Muslims that I'm speaking to were quite perturbed that Samuel Paty even showed these drawings to Muslim pupils, or was ready to do that. And there is some fear that now, because he's a martyr, he's a Republican martyr, it might become the norm for schools all over the country to show these drawings in the name of freedom of speech. Now, this is not something that would happen in the UK, because, you know, ultimately Muslims wouldn't stand for it in the UK. There would be a massive hue and cry. Do you think, I mean, first of all, was it acceptable as a French Muslim yourself? Was it acceptable in the name of secularism and freedom of speech for Samuel Paty to do that in the first place?
Well, whatever disagreement we have, nothing whatsoever could have justified it. Second, not one single Muslim organization or individual called for him to end up like that. But, and I'm extremely severe on that, nothing should have happened on social media, because there was a social media campaign. His name was given on social media, then his address. So imagine the state of fear he lived in before he got killed. Yeah, nothing. And the issue was being solved in the high school or the college, the secondary school. Now, having said that, yes, we can disagree on the fact that I don't think you can teach freedom of speech by singling out a specific community. To me, if you want to, I'm a human rights campaigner, you want to speak of freedom of speech, speak of the brave journalists who do reporting in the war zone, investigations on corruption, people who expose the coalition of money and power and that are destroying our societies, which means speaking truth to power. For me to make a drawing against people who won't answer me back, but again, I think it was what we call maladresse, whatever clumsiness. Clumsiness. It might have been clumsy, but hey, there's being clumsy and being beheaded, and there's a whole wide world between both of them.
Yes, sir. I don't know what your plans are now. I've got John on the line. You're welcome to stay with us. We have about 100 comments already, which I'm going to bring up a few of them. I'm going to get John in as well. You're welcome to stay and continue to be part of the debate, or you can remove yourself from the stream if you want to. It's up to you, brother.
I'll let John speak, and I'll be around just in case.
All right, no problem. Let's take a few comments before I bring John in. I will introduce you, John, in a few minutes. We've just got so many comments that I want to kind of let the viewers have their say as well. There's a few long comments here which I'm gonna kind of get at. So Rayanne Ducomte says, Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm a Muslim from France, and here is a detailed summary of the situation in this country. There are between 4 and 6 million in France. All right, so that's going into a long. Let's get some shorter comments. Otherwise, it'll take me an hour just to read them out. Didn't want to see a depressing title like this. Yeah, the title of the show, and I should bring Yasser in on that, is Should Muslims Make Hijra from France? Are conditions getting so bad for Muslims that they should actually consider leaving the country?
I'm home.
And go where? Well, I know a lot of women who wear the niqab, for example, Yasser. They're going to London from France. There are many of them. Obviously,
in London, and in the UK, you have Prevent, which also about policing Muslim bodies and spaces. So wherever you go, there is a shrinking space, and democracy, the rule of law, and civil liberties are shrinking all over the globe. So wherever you go, you're going to face limits on your freedoms as a human being.
Okay, a visiting soul says Le Pen and Macron both are anti-Islam, so France is currently riding the Islamophobia train. Pensée Islamique says the Imam is not an Imam, he's a clown. Oh, this was the guy you were talking about before. Is showing profit nude education. Obviously, Muslims would not agree with that. Yeah, Imam said the right thing, respect the laws of the land. I'll read out a few more before I bring in John. I think much needs more to be done about Muslim French soccer players regarding Islamophobia, just like the NBA players did for him. Players like Pogba, Ribéry, etc. have a massive following in France. The time is near, fear Allah. I could read out more comments, but I'm going to get John on, and perhaps we can come to the comments a bit later. All right, so John Litchfield is a journalist, a veteran journalist. I think you've lived in France for many, many years. I think you were the Independence correspondent in France when the Independent first launched in 1986, I believe. And you've written for many other publications as well, John. John has been game enough to come on today because I tell you what, I challenge many people on social media to debate with me. And these were guys that were attacking me on social media, and none of them had the balls to come and debate. John has come on. We're not going to have a confrontation here. We're going to talk like civilized human beings. But John basically is a supporter of French secularism. He wrote a very interesting article in the Unheard platform yesterday, which I read. John, what do you make of what's happened over the last few days or few weeks in France?
What can I say? I mean, I've actually been here 23 years, Roshan, for the Independent, as you say, and more recently freelancing. I think what happened was calamitous. I think it has created a great sense of shock in France, and not amongst Muslims as well. I think Yasser would probably agree with that. It may seem, well, this is just one more incident and it's only one person, and yet there were many, many people killed in previous incidents. Why has this caused so much shock? Partly because it was an attack on a teacher, partly the nature of the murder. Partly, I think that it was also quick. You know, that the incident of the class, which I can come back to and describe perhaps more fully, only happened 2 weeks before, or 10 days before, I think, the murder. Yeah. And this kind of acceleration of anger, acceleration of the events which led to the murder of Samuel Paty, is partly about radical Islam, if you like, but I think it's partly a story of the internet, you know, and of a lot of misleading information that was put out there on the internet and led to the reaction that killed this teacher last Friday. So there are a number of reasons why this has caused an enormous sense of shock to me, but also to other French people.
But John, there are, since this has happened, several raids have taken place. Today, I believe, a mosque has been shut down north of Paris. There have been raids against Muslim establishments, and the Interior Minister has clearly said that not everyone raided had anything to do with any crime. And he was just sending a message. Isn't this pure intimidation? And isn't this what leads to radicalization?
Well, I mean, you can talk about intimidation both ways then, Roshan. There are many French people who think that the kind of incidents, the kind of episodes that led up to the beheading of Samuel Paty was also intimidation. It's not the first time that has happened in schools that Muslim parents have taken exception to things happening and have threatened schools.
But that's intimidation on behalf of an individual rather than a state, isn't it?
The state, I think, today, it's lashing out. Of course it is. It's under pressure to show some kind of a strong reaction. So it's rounding up the usual suspects, maybe, in the words of the film. But why were these people not arrested before if they're regarded as a threat to the country? It's a perfectly reasonable question to put. Why was that mosque not closed? I think the closure of the mosque was foolish. I mean, the mosque's only involvement in this was to have passed on the film, which was also a foolish thing to do. This is the video put out by a father of one of the pupils in the school, which is entirely misleading account of what happened with this one class, civics class that the teacher gave. So yes, I would somewhat agree with you that some of what's happening in France now does go too far and leads to further spiral of anger and retaliation. But intimidation, I think you can say there's intimidation on both sides in this story.
But what I was saying is that, I mean, the intimidation, what happened on Friday, obviously that was intimidation on behalf of an individual. Whereas here on Monday, we have the French state, the full weight of the French state, basically targeting innocent people. I mean, John, I mean,
Roshan, they're not innocent people. I mean, these are people who are on the lists of suspects of radical Islamic activists who haven't had enough proof against them to be able to have anything done against them before, and maybe in many cases nothing will be done against them this time. A lot of them are foreign citizens who are in France and can't be extradited because the countries they come from refuse to take them back, and that will probably happen again. So when the Interior Minister says he's going to send these people back home, he may be just whistling in the dark. He's not able necessarily to do that under French law.
I mean, I'll let Yasser come in a second because I think he wanted to intervene. But I must, I mean, obviously we have the prevent strategy here in the UK. In France, I think you have counterterrorism laws as well. But I think it is quite dangerous to say when no one has been proven guilty in courts, when no actual evidence has been put in the public arena, when a judge hasn't made a verdict, to say they're not innocent people, I think a lot of people would find that quite difficult to stomach, John.
Well, okay. I mean, they're obviously innocent until they're proven guilty, but the police is entitled to arrest people it feels are a threat to the country, and that's France is a country of law. If these people are arrested and there is no proof of their having committed or planned a crime, nothing will happen to them. But I think and I agree with you. The government is, to an extent, lashing out and probably overreacting. But that is the nature of the kind of pressure a government is under when something as horrific as this happens. And
yes, do you want to intervene?
This is the culmination of a series of pretty horrific incidents in France, which have been much more costly in terms of life, and not just in many cases of Muslim lives, like the Nice truck attack, in which many Muslims were killed on the seafront in Nice. So you can see why the government has been horrified as much as anyone else. You can see why it's under pressure to maybe react and overreact. But I wouldn't defend everything that they've done.
Can I just bring Yasser in? Yasser?
Well, if we take the example of the state of emergency that was passed in 2015 and became permanent in October 2017, 4,000 and a few hundreds, nearly 5,000 raids were carried. Again, against predominantly against Muslim homes, businesses, and places of worship. 0.16% of those raids led to an investigation on terror grounds. At the same time, we have the French government to try to kind of make the statistics look good, even including what we call apology of terrorism, which actually can raise questions on freedom of speech. So now 0.16% of those raids are carried against Muslims. We have two victims: French society, because now our whole community is treated as the enemy within, as stated by Manuel Valls, the former socialist prime minister. The enemy within was a term coined for the Jews less than a century ago. The consequences we know from my country. Now, the second consequence is that those Muslims' homes that got raided, and I spoke to victims of that, couples that got shattered, kids traumatized, etc. We don't know the extent of the consequences, the psychological trauma of kids seeing their parents humiliated and treated like criminals. Now, on top of it, as the state of emergency is ongoing, and as the government is blindly attacking any other organization, many people I know, they literally slept by the entrance door, so when the cops show up, they wouldn't terrorize the kids. It got to that level. We have those answers, and terrorist attacks still took place. On top of it, we have all these laws, mass surveillance, the MC catchers. We can raid any place we wish, and we still carry out raids against people against whom we have nothing to blame for, legally speaking.
It's very easy to say these things, and I just agree partly with Roshan that some of the overreaction, but it's not the Muslim people of France who've been under attack the last few days.
But they are so far. I mean, like when you say Islamic separatism and you don't define it, that means any person, any Muslim person.
We can define it if you want. We can talk about what that does mean, and we can talk about what Macron said in the speech 2 or 3 weeks ago and why he wanted to try and combat that. And it seems to me, in many ways, although there were many flaws in it, and you can criticize it, pick holes in it, there were many things in that speech that made sense. And it's interesting that it got a lot of bad reaction in the wider Muslim world, possibly because it was misunderstood and misrepresented again. But it was generally well received by moderate Muslim organizations, mainstream Muslim organizations.
Which ones?
not all aspects of it, but it was.
No, come on, sir. No, no. When we speak about so-called mainstream organizations, we have to see if they are legitimate with their base or not. We know the CFCM has been set up by the Minister of Interior back then, Nicolas Sarkozy, in the Secular Republic. That's a no-go. That's a no-no. Second of all, the CFCM never held free and fair elections, so they represent only themselves and the foreign power they represent: Algeria, Morocco, Turkey. Now, if you continue on that line, John, please, in just 30 seconds. Now, the blind targeting of it is that we have no definition. So it means we can accept it now. I mean, the white majority population may think, well, separatism may apply to these bad apples among Muslims, just like radicalization. But the state of emergency, it began with Muslim homes. It ended up with raids against environmentalists, anarchists, union leaders, and even against journalists who revealed the arms trade between France and Saudi Arabia against Yemen. So, of course, we are going to single out a community to say it's acceptable. Don't worry, it's only about those bad Muslims. But once Allah, we accept a precedent, we're just next. First, they came for the communists. I wasn't a communist, etc., etc. They came after me, and there was nobody left to speak for me.
Let John come back in, and then I'm going to ask John a question.
Any fair-minded person who read Macron's speech would not say that was an attack on the 5 million strong, or as you say, maybe as many 6 million strong people of Muslim origin in France. And as that message that you showed briefly, which was too long to read out, said, a large number of those people are not necessarily practicing or not necessarily extraordinarily passionate about their faith. Many of them are. They're not necessarily therefore radicals or dangerous people. I absolutely accept that. I've done a lot of work talking to people in the banlieue, and in the 23 years I've been in France, I've met many people of different kinds. I know, I have a sense of who the Muslim community in France is, and it's a very complicated community. But I have the sense that speech of Macron's, which also accepted that separatism had partly been created by a French state over many years by dumping people in poorer suburbs of the big cities, also accepted there was a lot of separatism on the part of parts of the rich white community in France, which is absolutely true as well. The most separate community you could imagine in France would be the rich bourgeois of Paris, not Muslims in the banlieue. All that was accepted in speech. He was trying to make a balanced response to it. There may be things in there which are clumsy, maybe things which are flawed.
John,
it isn't to me an attack on Muslims in France. It was an attempt to say Muslims are here, they're here to stay, they're not going to go away, they're part of our nation, but they must be integrated in the nation while respecting their faith. They must be integrated in the nation, not want to stand apart from the nation, which is what the radical Islamic groups in France are accused of wanting to do, and in fact do want to do.
John, as an observer from the outside, it seems to me, whenever I watch the French media, whenever I visit France, it seems to me that ultimately what our goal is for these attacks to stop, and for all communities in France to have a cohesive, harmonious society. That is the goal. For me, to reach that goal, you have to have a holistic discussion. You can't just have a discussion about Islamic extremism, about Muslims being radicalized. You also have to have a discussion about French colonization history, about French wars abroad now, about racism and Islamophobia in France. And it seems to me that's what's missing from the debate in France.
But then read Macron's speech, Roshan, because that was precisely, and maybe there were parts of it that you would disagree with, but that was precisely what he tried to do. He put it in that context. He put it in the context of colonial history. He put it in the context of economic oppression of many people, not just people who are of Muslim faith in the banlieue. He put it in the context of the racism which does exist in French society. There's no about that. So it was an attempt to make it a holistic response of that kind. There are many things one can say about it. It might now be skewed off into a much more possibly oppressive sort of form in the law that comes because of what's happened. I hope not. And it seems to me actually that if you look at the events of the last few days, that this was not just an attack on Samuel Paty. It was not. The parent of a 13-year-old girl in the school, who was not even present at the lecture he gave, who was the main person who raised this problem, was helped by a radical imam who's well known to be connected with radical organizations in France. And he specifically, on several occasions, and also the killer, in his statement he put out on the internet, mentioned Macron's speech in Les Mureaux 2 weeks earlier. This was an attack partly on Macron's attempt to try and create a more peaceful and more constructive atmosphere between Muslims and the rest of the communities in France. So it was a kickback against that. And by whom? That's the question you need to answer.
John, I want to ask you about French secularism now. I think you're a supporter of French secularism and the idea that, you know, basically you respect the secular nature of the state. All religions are, you know, all people are they can believe what they want to believe, but in the public space, people are neutral. Now, to me, that sounds, some people will say that's a great idea, especially in mixed societies with lots of minorities. But it seems to me that, you know, freedom of speech only exists for some and not for everybody. So, for example, in France, it's a crime to deny the Holocaust. It's a crime, I believe, to even question the Armenian genocide. Pro-Palestine demonstrations have been banned. I think people have gone to jail for abusing the tricolor, the national anthem, the police, etc., etc. Yet it's fine to basically insult 5 million Muslims. So it seems to me that, you know, ultimately France's freedom of speech laws, its notion of secularism, is a cover in many ways for racists to attack Muslims.
No, that's complete nonsense, Roshan. Really is nonsense. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read not Canon Chenet, I should say Charlie Hebdo.
Charlie Hebdo, a bit, yeah.
I often look at. It's a very dull, boring magazine. It's sort of obsessive about certain things. It's obsessive about hating religion, about being the kind of borders of assertion of free speech to an extreme in France. But if you look at their front pages or their cartoons, they're by no means all attacks on Muslims. You know, they're vicious against the Catholic Church. They're vicious against the Jewish faith as well. So the suggestion that somehow freedom of speech is only there to attack Muslims is completely wrong. It's completely wrong. You only hear about it because it's the Muslim community, and you know, I can understand why, who react strongly to this. I mean, I'm sure Jews are as offended by some of the stuff that's in, not just in Charlie Hebdo, but elsewhere in France, as Muslims are by the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. And it certainly is true of the Catholic Church and of people of deep Catholic faith in France. But they accept it as part of the way France is. Charlie Hebdo is not my middle name. I would not necessarily defend everything they do. I think that what they do is partly, it's a sort of spiral, as you were saying earlier, that the more people attack them from what they're doing, the more extreme they get. The more they feel themselves to be the kind of frontline fighters for freedom of speech. But freedom of speech has to be freedom to say something interesting, finally, and I don't think Charlie Hebdo often has anything very interesting to say. But yes, the idea that freedom of speech or that the secular state has been invented just to control and oppress Muslims is completely wrong. I mean, it's something that goes back in French history. It was something that was created to end a sort of civil war that existed between the Catholic Church and the Republic throughout the 19th century. And now that's historically no longer needed because there are very few people of very strong Catholic faith left in France. So there isn't the tension that existed in the 19th century. It is therefore causing this tension with the Muslim community because, you know, whether people like it or not, I think Muslims do have a strong sense of their faith. Both Muslims who are not at all wanting to carry out the kind of action we saw last Friday and others. So that is why the Muslim community comes into conflict with the secular state, because
John, can I just stop you there for a second?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I'll bring you in very briefly. If you could be brief, brother, in your comments, because I want to. You had a lot of time to speak before. Does Charlie Hebdo discriminate equally?
No, we see where they are, and I think I agree with John when he says they are the term extremely focused. They have extremely, obsessive about some topics. But again, when it comes to freedom of speech, I don't think anything should be banned. I'm quite radical, and I may offend many people on that. But this comes again with a responsibility. If I have the right to offend you in what you hold dear, you should also have the right to have a platform to answer me. And we do not see that. Muslims again are all the time spoken of, and they are seldom allowed to speak for themselves. As for laicite, Muslims are not against the secular law. They're asking to stick to laïcité. But laïcité, the secular law, has been weaponized. And to quote a right-wing conservative politician, François Barouin, we have to go from laïcité to a new laïcité that targets the rising visibility of Muslim communities. If we stick to the constitutional laïcité, everybody's going to be happy. My freedom of religion, if I have a religion, are protected. And of course, religion doesn't interfere with politics. But again, if you start transforming laïcité into, we go from the neutrality of the state to the neutrality of public space by targeting Muslim mothers, students, etc., then there is a weaponization and violations of laïcité.
Okay. I mean, the only thing I would say is that, when I see Charlie Hebdo, I mean, I haven't counted every front page of Charlie Hebdo over the last few years, but it does seem to me that the majority of their targeting is against Muslims. They will occasionally target Jews, and I don't support that as well. I don't think that should happen either. But whenever I see people bringing up these, oh look, Charlie Hebdo targeted a Jew, it's always from 2015 or something like that. It's all like 4 years ago.
No.
Once every 4 years. The only other thing I would say is that even if it is the case, John, just let me finish and I'll bring you in.
With Muslims. I mean, it was Muslims who invaded Charlie Hebdo's office and killed.
Yeah, no one's defending that. Let me just finish, John. I'll let you come back because it's not good that we talk over each other.
It's probably not true if you to read Charlie Hebdo to think that it's sort of viciously anti-religious. It's brilliantly anti-religious. It has an extraordinarily sort of almost radical secular viewpoint. Far left in its opinions. It's not racist in that sense at all. It would be very anti-racist in every way. It never writes anything which would be in any way anti-black or anti-Algerian, anti-Moroccan, anti-Muslim, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, certainly all of them.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring Hafsa Kara Mustafa on. There's an echo somewhere. Is someone listening to this through?
Roshan, I'm not going to play on much anymore, I'm afraid. I have to go and break off shortly.
Yes, absolutely, John. Sorry, Hafsa, have you got? I can hear an echo coming.
It's not for me. I don't have any device switched on at my end.
All right, John. No problem. Just break off any time.
Okay,
the only thing I would say is
another time if you want to speak about this again. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us today and being a good sport. Thank you, John.
It was pleased to be with you.
All right. Okay. Bye bye. All right, John's gone off there. So he gave us, he did promise us 20 minutes and he gave us 20 minutes. So I'm not going to hold that against him. The only thing I would say on the final comments that he made is that, even if it is the case that Charlie Hebdo attacks Jews, Christians and Muslims equally, it's still not right for a start, but also ultimately attacking Christians in France is not going to lead to violence, is it? Whereas attacking Muslims in France may well lead to violence or at least discrimination. Hafsa Kara Mustafa, let me just introduce you really briefly, Hafsa. So Hafsa, you are a journalist. You are currently in Algiers, I understand, a Francophone journalist. You know France very well. You speak the language better than French people. Yeah, what do you make? Are you probably following the show a little bit? What do you make of what's been said?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, and again, not that I agree that it should insult Jews, but it doesn't actually. If anyone familiar with Charlie Hebdo, there was the infamous Cine Affair. The Cine Affair is one of its most famous cartoonists who drew a cartoon mocking Nicolas Sarkozy's son, who was planning to convert to Judaism to marry a wealthy heiress. And he merely mocked, saying he was an opportunist for doing that. And for that cartoon and for that comment, he was threatened, he was asked to apologize. He refused, and he was consequently sacked. So for a comment that could be construed as anti-Semitic, he was sacked, whereas day in, day out, Muslims are insulted. And when it comes to Christianity, yes, it's true. It does mock Christianity very often and in a very salacious and absolutely disgusting way. And again, not that I'm in any way justifying it, but Christianity is the majority religion. And it is also part of the sort of anti-clerical tradition in France, because the clergy was very much hated by the Republicans, who saw it as the allies of the monarchy. So there's a political attitudes towards what the French would call bouffer du curé, which means eating a priest, basically sort of priest bashing, basically, which is essentially not particularly targeting Jesus or the Christian faith, but rather the politicized clergy. A bit like if you'd say we could criticize the Muslim Brotherhood, but not necessarily Islam. Once again, without going into the details, I think you have to remember that Muslims are a minority, and as such, they're not in a powerful position in the way that the Christian religion is in a country where it is the majority faith. So that comparison is very unfair.
Look, yes, thanks a lot for staying. Again, I'll say to you, you can leave at any time, but if you want to stick around, that's great. I'm going to read some comments out because there's like hundreds of comments coming through, and I've hardly read any comments out. So let's take a few, and then maybe Hafsa and Yasser, you can comment on the comments. So Muhammad Ali says, Charlie Hebdo has blood on its hands. Hate creates more hate, and that magazine prints racist and Islamophobic content. Yet France defends them while Muslims are raided for tweeting about Islamophobia. In government, Idris C. Hamedi. He was the brother who is the president of Baraka City, which was one of the establishments raided last week, I believe. Muzammil Mushtaq says, this hijra will surely sound like a victory for Macron. Basically, let me explain to you guys. I asked a quite provocative question as a promo for this program. Should Muslims make hijra from France? So that's why people are bringing up this hijra thing a lot. It'll be a victory for Macron. There must be an international intervention by Muslim countries to pressurize Macron. Hijra is something 50-50, cons and pros. Ibrahim says Muslim countries are almost non-existent in a practical sense. Conseil Islamique says we should make hijra in order to practice our religion. We can't practice in France. This is a fact. Michelle says Muslims shouldn't do hijra unless things get worse than this. Akhir says pronouncements and the ideologies being spread by Islamist scholars is the main cause of Muslims being blamed generally. Don't blame the secular society for targeting Muslims when major sects of Islam are portraying an extreme view of Islam. Conservative Muslims are the ones, wherever they go, they feel they have a right to enforce their religious beliefs and ideologies. I'll take two more comments and I'll bring in Hafsa. Aman says that anyone in the mainstream media made a possible case that this may be also dogwood politics from Macron to appeal to the Front National, the Front National supporters. And finally, Ali says, are there any Muslim French activists we can support so that their voice can be heard more internationally? Hafsa, what do you make of those comments?
Well, there seems to be a sort of 50-50 view on whether it's still possible to live in France. I think the situation isn't as terrible as it comes across in the media. I think the media do tend to exacerbate things. I think on a daily basis, perhaps it's not as bad. But I do think that the situation is very tense. And the problem is whatever grievances the Muslims have, they're simply not heard. They're simply not taken on board. And what is very alarming in France is that today, what we would regard as Islamophobia, which is a form of bigotry, is almost something that the French take pride in. It's no longer about thinking that attacks on Muslims are wrong. Actually, attacks on Muslim and Islam, but also on Muslims indirectly, because the consequences are there, is sort of perfectly normalized. And I think the more this behavior is tolerated and it's normalized, the more it's going to be difficult for French people living in France. I mean, I'm not living in France, so I couldn't possibly judge, but I do know many people who are living in France who are now considering leaving, perhaps returning to their parents' homeland, perhaps moving to countries such as Turkey. I think Turkey seems to have some sort of appeal for many, for some bizarre reason. I'm not quite sure. But you know, there is this idea that somehow France is becoming very, very difficult. Actually, Britain is also attracting a lot of Muslims from North African backgrounds, precisely because in England women can wear the hijab, and there aren't all those issues that French Muslims suffer on a very daily basis. So it's not always a major attack, but it's constant drip of Islamophobic attitudes that they have to suffer, and which ultimately is resulting to many either leaving or considering leaving. Yes.
Yes, he doesn't believe in the concept of France at all, do you? Yes.
There's a huge echo. I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, sorry, there is an echo. I was just saying, you don't believe in this concept of Muslims leaving France for another country. You think they should stay there and fight it out. Well, not fight it out, wrong terminology, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's, leaving would give a reason for Islamophobes to think that they are winning and that somehow they are on the right path. The second, part of my answer is that I lived in 7 countries myself, 7, and I came back home. And I lived in Muslim majority countries, in the Middle East, in Africa. I lived in the US. And actually, some Muslim countries were even worse when it comes to justice and liberties. Like, I'm not going to mention them, they're off topic. So at the end of the day, you know, where you belong, you always end up going back to it. And even my parents' country, and I go back and I love it, but still, you know, it's, you know, I'm a kid on the south side of Paris, you know, that nothing's gonna, and I carry that with me wherever I go. So of course, people may be tempted because the atmosphere is toxic. And I have friends who left. They went to Belgium, they went to Canada, they are in the US and swore to never come back. But it is true that some people might be tempted. But again, you know, wherever you go, at some point, you're going to face that, you know, that glass. You're like, hold on a second, you know, something is missing and I'm not getting everything right. So it's, of course, I cannot, you know, there was a time I would say, if you leave, you're betraying the struggle. I no longer say that because I see how difficult it is. If you're a Muslim woman in France and you're a black woman and you wear the headscarf, you are socially dead because you're going to face multiple layers of racism, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-black racism, and now your headscarf. And if you are a Muslim woman, again, wearing a headscarf in France, you have a 1% chance of getting a job. And those 1% who get to work, they are self-employed, and they're coming after them with these laws on separatism because self-employed nannies, etc., they're being told, well, you work for the state, you have to be neutral. So yes, I understand people who want to leave, but again, if we all leave, who's going to be left?
Yasser, unfortunately, I'm going to have to remove you because I think the echo is because we have 3 people online at the same time. So you've had your chance. I'm going to give Hafsa a chance. Yasser, I really appreciate you coming on today and educating us and hope to see you again soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Okay. So I'm going to kick Yasser out of the studio, and it was just me and Hafsa now. And hopefully that will solve the echo problem. People have been complaining about that. Look, all the comments seem to be quite negative, Hafsa. It seems as though people are saying, you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better. How do we solve this problem? How do we stop the attacks? How do we have a harmonious society in France? Is that even possible?
I think that there would have to be a will, or a political will, to do that. I think it doesn't seem to materialize. Politicians seem to be blowing hot and cold, and we just saw that very recently. France is in the middle of a pandemic, like many countries. It's facing problems of high unemployment, you know, entire sectors of the economy destroyed, and Macron comes out of it and says, let's reform Islam. I mean, it just came completely out of the blue, completely unnecessary, completely untimely, and that's the kind of thing that the establishment, the French establishment, continues to do to antagonize Muslims. Now, I follow French media rather regularly, and what is really alarming is that not a day goes by, not an absolute day goes by without a debate about Islam. Absolutely every single day. And to the point where there was some sort of humor when the pandemic started, saying, oh, well, thank God, at least the focus is now going to be on the pandemic. But would you believe there was even a debate once about at the peak of the pandemic, which was around Ramadan, and a doctor came on a mainstream television and said, well, we're extremely worried now because Muslims have a tendency to spit everywhere, which is going to heighten the health risk for French people. That's the kind of commentary that you hear on French media day in, day out. It seems astonishing, and it seems, and some of the words that are coming out from politicians and from mainstream figures is so shocking. It would seem very unlikely from a British perspective, but it's a daily occurrence in France. And I think that sort of indicates that there's no will. If anything, they're just continuously goading Muslims until eventually, and I'm not in any way justifying the beheading or anything, but at this point, if day in, day out you do this, you will eventually push somebody to snap. And this is exactly what happened. This teacher, who never deserved this faith, would never have asked his Jewish pupils to leave the room, to humiliate them in that way and say, I'm about to show you a cartoon of the Holocaust. He wouldn't have done that. He would have been sacked. He would have been suspended. So he knew that the only way he could get away with taking this example of freedom of expression is to goad Muslims. And it's always the same. There was a doctor who was a humanitarian doctor who worked in Gaza, came back as a teacher. He was teaching at the University of Nanterre, medicine. And he had an exam where the question was about war crimes in Gaza. Jewish students felt offended. He was consequently suspended from his job. And it took 8 years to clear his name. The whole affair went all the way up to the High Court. So this is the sort of double standards you're constantly seeing through French media, through French institutions, whereby Muslim sensitivity is completely ignored, and Jewish sensitivity, for instance, or homosexual, or issues related to LGBT issues, for instance. So anything that is offensive to gays is off limits, anything offensive to Jews is off limits. But when it comes to offending Muslims, well, tough. You have to, if you don't like it, you lump it. That's the thing. And this attitude is really affecting, young, imagine you're young, marginalized, you can't get a job. There are many frustrations boiling. This is just a recipe for disaster because no one is coming with a sort of a discourse that seems to bring down tensions. On the contrary, every single politician, every single media figure, it keeps adding oil to the fire.
I mean, France is a very right-wing country, isn't it? I have to. I mean, Marine Le Pen, the National Front leader, far-right leader, she got 25% of the vote last time. She may well become president in a few years' time. I mean, it's just lurching. I mean, with every attack, it lurches more and more and more to the right, doesn't it?
Of course. And I mean, this is the sort of vicious circle that France is now in, because every attack sort of feeds the far right, justifies its actions, justifies its speech. Every time something like this happens, Marine Le Pen is ecstatic because she said, well, this told you so. This is what happens when you have Muslims. This is what happens when you allow too many immigrants to come in because they don't share our values. I mean, all the discourse that which is exacerbated through issues like this. And so, I mean, every time we see a massacre, a killing of this sort, you will see a rise in the National Front voters.
Would you live in France, Hafsa? I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, I've lived in France and I've lived in Britain, but I would never live in France again. It's just, I mean, I didn't want to insult the brother and keep on going on about should Muslims make hijra from your country, but I seriously would not live there under that brutalization, under that constant demonization, discrimination. If there was somewhere better, I would go. I understand that, people who have deep roots there, who might own property there and all their family is there. I'm not saying every French Muslim should leave France, but those who have the opportunity, I think they should seriously consider it.
I mean, I personally would never leave there. Having said that, I also have to mention I mean, it's obvious I don't wear the hijab, so that makes me, in a way, not a potentially obvious target for attacks. But just as a matter of information, today, I don't know if you know this, 2 women were viciously attacked outside the Eiffel Tower who wear the hijab. So it tends to be people who are more visibly Muslim that have faced daily discriminations. But again, yes, absolutely, I wouldn't. And I mean, when I watch the TV, I'm infuriated, and I'm infuriated by how normalized Islamophobia is. But I'm also, I have to say, and I know a lot of viewers from France are going to hate me for saying this, but the Muslim apathy in France is also very infuriating. I mean, every time there is an issue related to any form of other bigotry, you will see communities come together, organize, march. And this is a country which has a very proud tradition of protest, etc. And yet when it comes to Muslims, they're very apathetic. They really barely sort of come forward and say enough. And perhaps if they were more proactive in telling the establishment, telling the media that this has got to stop, showing that they're a force in terms of numbers, then maybe people would. It's sort of the relation between the bully and the bullied. If you never stand up to the bully, he will sort of keep going on and on.
Yeah.
This is the relation. French Muslims are in this position at the moment.
They need to sort themselves out. So just hang on there for a second. I'm going to play out a video of Idriss Sy Hamedi, the president of Baraka City, talking on Friday, I think, just after he was released. He was arrested. His Muslim organization was raided. Nothing was found there. He's not been charged with anything. He was going after public figures, Islamophobes on social media, and he was charged with Twitter harassment. I've never heard of that crime before, but that's what he was charged with, Twitter harassment. Here's what he had to say after his release.
Il y a un policier, il est venu, il m'a pris la tête une première fois, il me l'a claqué contre le mur.
One of the policemen banged my head against the wall. I told him, look, there's no problem. I'm going to cooperate. You don't need to do this. But he did it again. He banged my head against the wall again. And then he put handcuffs on me and it hurt so badly.
Serré mais tellement fort. Regardez. Attendez.
I was asking them, why have you done this raid? What have I done? And they told me something like, I've insulted the dignity of public persons. I said to them, are you serious? You raided me for that? You should have raided me for something like terrorism. Tell me that. something serious. You guys are mad. You're completely mad. It's like I always said. The justice system here, the judicial system, the police, they're being used to put pressure on us. It's scandalous.
En fait, c'est exactement ce que je disais, hein. C'est l'instrumentalisation des services de police, de la justice. Parce qu'il y en a un, il a un pouvoir où il a le bras long et il dit tiens, va me régler celui-là, va lui mettre un coup de pression, on lui envoie une colonne d'assaut.
This is the 4th raid on Baraka City, and they've never found anything. Seriously, this is becoming really, really bad. Everyone should be outraged by this. Baraka City is a prominent Muslim organization that's present in 26 countries. Yet we're raided like this? We're treated like this? This isn't normal.
Musulmane, qui est présente dans 26 pays, elle se fait perquisitionner comme ça. C'est pas normal.
Okay, let's take some more comments. People are complaining about the echo. Hafsa, you haven't got your speaker on or anything like that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, all right. Seems to be when I'm speaking, unfortunately. I hope people can bear with me. Maybe Hafsa, it's when I speak that's the problem. Maybe Hafsa, you can read out some of these comments.
Beheading is unacceptable, disproportionate and uncivilized. This teacher was liked by Muslim students too. This creates more media attention on these posters of Muhammad, I'm supposing, on perpetrator, Fuad Ahmed. Dawood King is saying 6 million Muslims migrate to Belgium, ? Karima is saying, Assalamu alaikum, I'm a French Muslimah from African descent. 200% we should leave. 2 Muslimah have been stabbed at the Tour Eiffel and no media talks about it. They plan to take our children. Muhammad Salih is saying, we are Muslim but don't follow Islam. That's why all is happening against us. Where would Muslims do hijra? The best countries to live in are Western ones in terms of economic opportunities and personal rights, regardless of Charlie Hebdo and hijab issues. For Ad Ahmed again. Pensée Islamique is saying, we don't care about what Islamophobes are thinking, Yasser. We should live for Allah. Who cares if French Islamophobes think they've won? Harim Sajid is saying, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help brethren in France and elsewhere. Prayers from Pakistan. Rage is saying, Hands of Stone Hijra is the only way. We need to unite and use what we've learned to build a state that we can live in.
And finally.
Okay, Tayyib Abu Sayyaf said, leave why? France has the greatest number of Muslims in Europe, mainly from ex-French colonies in North Africa. Muslims must learn about their real identity and bring Islam to France instead of trying to assimilate. France has also the highest rate of conversion to Islam, and the people will be more open to the beautiful message of Islam if the Muslims show what it really means. This is a great test for the Muslims to show the hypocrisy of secularism, so people will naturally support them.
Okay, I'm going to keep my question really short because of the echo. Hafsa, how do we sort this out?
Well, I would have hoped a better dialogue. I would have hoped somebody just get rid of all these heinous cartoons. I mean, how many people have to die before anyone says, you know, enough? And I mean, just to go back, and this is a very important point because everyone's been reiterating that this is about freedom of expression. It isn't. France has the most stringent anti-freedom of expression laws. You can't discuss not only the Holocaust, but the Armenian genocide. You can't say rappers, hip-hop musicians have been taken into custody for insulting the police, for insulting the Republic, for insulting public figures. So the laws are very stringent. It seems as if in France today, freedom of expression is limited essentially to posting over and over again 5 cartoons of the Prophet. That seems to be the only area where people are absolutely free. And there is really antagonizing a minority in this way day in, day out can have no good consequences. And if you're going to, you know, of all the examples of freedom of expression, why consistently go on to this one? It's a vicious circle because the French seem to be saying, well, you know, we have to be defiant. If they're threatening us, then we keep showing these cartoons. And they keep showing these cartoons and they keep goading people until somebody very violent is going to react in a violent way. And the problem, of course, is that there's no alternative. There are no areas where Muslims can actually complain. The parents complained through very legal, normal channels saying that this was unacceptable. Should I also add that the cartoon that they picked was actually quite sexually graphic. So it wasn't only very offensive, it was a very graphic picture to show 12, 13-year-olds. And under any other circumstance, I think non-Muslim parents would have objected to that cartoon in any case. But because it's Muslim, it suddenly became a sort of cause célèbre of freedom of expression. But I think this is it. This has to stop. This sort of to and from.
Would the attack stop if Charlie Hebdo was shut down, for example?
No, because I think if the French keep this mindset that they have to be defiant, somebody else is going to pick it up and show it. I mean, this wasn't shown by or published by Charlie Hebdo. This was published by a teacher. So, I mean, this issue, this has become the sort of epicenter of what freedom of expression means. And they keep goading Muslims with it. So I think it's sort of gone beyond Charlie Hebdo now anyway.
Okay. All right, Hafsa, thank you very much for coming on today. I really appreciate it all the way there from Algeria. That was Hafsa Kara Mustafa, Algerian Arab journalist. Assalamu alaikum, Hafsa.
Salam.
Okay, sorry guys about the echo. I'm going to wrap up now. I hope that the echo has gone, but I'm not sure if it has because I still see people sending me comments saying the echo is really annoying. I hope it hasn't spoilt the show completely because I think we had a lot of people watching, a lot of comments, and inshallah, a lot of kind of erudite, educational and informing discussion. So I'm going to wrap up now. Look, you know, France treats its Muslims really badly. Discrimination against Muslims in France is absolutely mainstream. They are constantly demonized in the media every single day. The state demonizes them. And, you know, in this country, you know, Boris Johnson, if he went after Muslims, he would at least come up with a good excuse to go after Muslims. Whereas in France, they don't even do that. They just say, we're going to raid you and we're going to just because we want to send out a message that you have to behave yourself. That is what the Interior Minister said today. It's absolutely unbelievable. The pressure on Muslims, they live in horrendous conditions in ghettos, you know, which are called banlieues, just on the outskirts of major cities where the conditions are like third world conditions, where you drive 20 minutes to the center of town, to more affluent suburbs. You know, literally, it's like night and day, first world and third world. French Muslims live in third world conditions in one of the richest countries in the world. I lived in France. I didn't enjoy it. I speak the French language fluently. I know the history of France. I know French culture. I'm not a fan of it. As a Muslim, I would live in the UK any day compared to France. So I do say to French Muslims, if you have the opportunity, I know a lot of you won't have the opportunity, so it's a redundant question, but if you have the opportunity, do think about leaving, because why would you want to live under that state of discrimination day after day after day? I'm pretty pessimistic as well in terms of these attacks. I think these terror attacks will continue because ultimately, you know, Muslims can't do anything about it. You know, because they're not organized within Muslim communities in France. People aren't hiding terrorists under their beds. What is happening is you have the French state radicalizing Muslims by their foreign wars, by their racism, by their Islamophobia. And, you know, ultimately, these attacks are not plotted in mosques. They are perhaps plotted online with people self-radicalizing, and the Muslim community can't really be held responsible as a, you know, whole in a general way for that. So, you know, I think France is moving to the right because I can see what's happening. I called on Charlie Hebdo to be shut down on social media the other day. The amount of hate I was getting for calling Charlie Hebdo to be shut down on the basis of harmonious relations between Muslims and non-Muslims in France, because that's ultimately, we shouldn't be caring about ideologies here, about secularism, laïcité. We should be asking ourselves, how do we stop the bombs? The French intelligence community has failed time and time again to stop attacks in France from happening. So they must be doing something wrong. Maybe if they had a more holistic discussion and really tried to get to the French grassroots, instead of having interlocutors like these clowns, these imams, these state-sponsored imams that are on the payroll, who will just spout and serve as an echo chamber to whatever Emmanuel Macron and the French state says. They can do that, but ultimately they're only appeasing white France. They're not reaching Muslim France. And ultimately, if France wants to have good community relations, it has to reach Muslim France. It has to open up a serious conversation, not just pay lip service, but a serious conversation about France's bloody brutal colonial history, about its brutal wars in places like Mali, Syria, and elsewhere, which are happening today, against the rampant Islamophobia and racism that is mainstream in France, that is absolutely mainstream. None of that is being talked about. Instead, the French are just talking about Islamic extremism. Muslims, you sort your house out. Okay, that might play well on social media. It might play well in the mainstream media and to white France, but ultimately it's not going to stop the bombs going off. Ultimately, the only thing that's going to happen there is if you have an honest conversation where you bring in all the elements that go into radicalization. And that could include a frank discussion about Islamic extremism or whatever you want to call it, added to the mix. So that's me. That's my rant over. That's the big picture today. I am gonna read out a few more comments. The only other thing I would say is I want to end this broadcast by calling out all those cowards on social media that attacked me, that said I was an extremist, that said I was some kind of radical, that hated non-Muslims just because I called for Charlie Hebdo to be shut down and I defended Islam. Because I tell you what, I wanted one of them on the show today. I approached them behind the scenes and openly. And I said, okay, you're attacking me on social media. You're calling me this and that. You're giving it all that. Come on my show. Let's debate face to face, man to man. None of them stepped up. Absolutely none of these cowards, these keyboard warriors, stepped up to the challenge because they are bloody cowards. That's what they are. And that's why I'm going to give credit to John. You might not have liked his views. You might not have agreed with them, but he agreed to come on and he debated in a civilized way. So credit to John Litchfield. Let's take a few of these comments before I wrap up. Daoud King says the so-called Islamic State is not a solution. Marcus Hart says this dumb batch will get a muscle blade to her throat one day. She needs to shut up. Well, Marcus Hart, you're a little coward. You're anonymous as well. Anonymous profile. Okay. Keyboard warriors don't take any responsibility for their words. I'm not anonymous on social media. Okay. I say what I say. Everyone knows who I am. I take responsibility for my words. I have accountability for my words, whether I'm talking the truth or talking falsehood. I have accountability. But these cowards like Marcus Hart making threats on social media while being completely anonymous. What a coward. Hands of Stone says, always bring up examples of how they cannot say anything about Jews when their freedom of crap keeps summing up. It's, well, whatever, Hands of Stone, but you know very well that Muslims are treated differently to Jews in France. They're treated differently to Christians in France. They're treated differently to homosexuals in France. French Muslims are not arguing for special favors. They're only asking for equality, and that there be a zero tolerance when it comes to Islamophobia, just as there is a zero tolerance policy when it comes to anti-Semitism, etc., etc. Karima says, Pensée Islamique is right. Hijra should be made for Allah, and it's a matter of saving our faith. There's no way we can stay here without severely compromising on the fundamentals of our deen. So French Muslims agreeing that they should make Hijra. Aman says, remember from history when the Third Reich Nazism came to power in the 1930s, many Jewish people migrated elsewhere. However, it still did not prevent 6 million Jewish citizens murdered in the Holocaust. And I tell you what, the first stage to a genocide is media demonization, state demonization. Okay, a genocide isn't happening in France at the moment. It's not happening in Britain. But are we going to wait for them to come with the pitchforks? No, we got to stop them. We got to stop this nonsense, this Islamophobic, state-sponsored Islamophobia and this media Islamophobia before they actually start killing us. And I tell you what, that could literally happen soon, the way things are going. Good show, Mr. Roshan. In future, use earphones to avoid echo. Thank you for that. Thank you for that piece of advice. I will from next week, inshallah. Judgment Day couldn't come sooner, says Hands of Stone. Again, if a Muslim said that, I would say I would ruminate on it a little bit. But I think Hands of Stone isn't a Muslim, and I think that's a veiled threat. Rage says, interesting show, but it's something that the Muslim countries have lagged behind for hundreds of years when the technological innovation of Europe was adopted. Amir says they're trying to pressure Muslims to become like Jews and Christians, not forbidding evil and joining good, and watering our religion to love, love, love. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a campaign to secularize Islam. They want us to become like the Christians. You know, churches are completely empty these days. So much so that I call churches future mosques. Because let's face it, that's probably what they're going to be, because Christians aren't going to church anymore. And why? Because over centuries, what's happened is that they've diluted their religion. There are some Christian priests, they don't even believe in God anymore. That's like an optional to believe in God if you're a Christian. Whereas, alhamdulillah, Muslims, especially in Britain, we stick tight to our faith, because ultimately the trajectory of people who immigrate to a country is assimilation. And that's perhaps what's happened to American Muslims, maybe French Muslims as well, I'm not sure. But British Muslims, we're holding tight to the rope of Allah, mashallah. We haven't compromised completely on our religious and political principles. And that's why we are still strong as a community. And that's what gives me hope. Sayed says, it's all a build up to the coming of the Mahdi. Strange Muslim says, how can I join you on a call here to talk about you? Well, in future episodes, we might do call-ins. I haven't figured out the technology to make that happen, to be honest. But inshallah, we may do that in the future. Tayyib says, what's the Muslim population in Paris? Do you think they would dare attack us when so many young Muslims are in Paris? I think the population of Muslims in France is about 5 million. In Paris, I'm not sure. But there are more Muslims in France than there are in England. And most of them come from Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, and other countries, of course. Lots of Pakistanis there as well. I've met several of them. Amin says, genuinely think we can thank the Kashmiris for the strength of British Muslims. Bigging up the Kashmiris there. Let's get a few more comments in, because you've made so many of them, and I don't want to hang up and finish the feed before I read out as many comments as possible, which some of the comments I can't read out because they contain swear words or are a bit basically offensive. Sam Apprentice says, open bar to defend Muslims, and Muslims are second-class citizens. Marcus Hart, Quran as well. I'm not even going to read that out, astaghfirullah. Marcus Hart is a filthy little coward. Kareem Game says, your last comment, Hafsa, was straight to the point. So quite a few comments for Hafsa here, but I didn't read them out to her because of the echo. Sorry about that. Can you ask Hafsa, we should go about tackling these double standards and empower Muslims? Rustam Malik says, by France, media propaganda, genocide in Iraq and Syria.